Hello. In this video, I will showcase how to motion track items within a piece of footage. For this, we're going to be using the tracker options that After Effects offers us for 2D tracking. So I have a piece of video that is a short clip of a car going down a highway, and I'm going to create a composition with its settings, and you'll notice as I scrub, it's just a car coming down a highway. My goal is to turn this scene into a night scene and put headlights in front of the car. So to do so, I will select the layer that I've imported, and then on the right hand side, I will look for the tracker tab. Now, if that tab is not available for you, you can always go to Window, Tracker, and it will open it up for you. Now, the options that this tab offers you are Track Camera, which you will use for tracking 3D footage, and we will do that in the next video. You also have the ability to stabilize motion if the camera is shaky, or if the footage that you received is somewhat shaky, and you have the ability to track motion, which is what we're doing in this video. Now, to track motion, all you really need to do is select the layer and then click Track Motion. This will open up your layer window, and it will provide you with what we call a track point, the first point that we'll be tracking. This point by default is a position tracking because it's 2D footage. It's only looking for certain pixel information, and it's going to start tracking that point. Now, before we get started, make sure that you bring your time marker all the way to the beginning of your composition, and then anywhere in between the two rectangles you can click and drag. You'll notice that this gives you kind of like a scope vision of the target, and that is that little center rectangle. It increases the size, it zooms in into that area. That is your target area for tracking. Now, you don't want to get too detailed on this because obviously video things have a lot of motion blur when they move. So you need to make sure that you give a bit of a wiggle room as to what is being tracked. Because of that, the outer box basically is your extension, call it that, or the area that can be, as much as that thing that you're focusing on can be blurred. So if I want to track that headlight, let's say, I want to resize this window, the inner window, and place it sort of around the headlight. I'm going to focus in that area, on the dark area. This works best when you have really high contrast between the point that you're trying to track and anything around it. And then I'm going to slightly increase the size of the outer window so that is my margin of error, let's call it that. That is the area that the actual tracker is going to keep an eye on, making sure that if this item moves too fast, it stays within that box, within that bigger box. With that done, that is the default tracking mechanism for position. Usually when you're tracking, you want to track not just one point, you want to track more than one point within the footage. In our case, I want to track this second headlight. And so to do so, I will activate either scale or rotation. In my case, because the car is moving down a highway, the best option would be to say, I want to track rotation. Now, the tracker basically, the option gives you the same option. So if you turn one off or the other, it's just going to take a look at the overall footage, and it's going to determine what is happening. Is it rotation over scale, or is it scale over rotation? Based on what you observe when you're looking at the footage, you make that determination and you choose which one of the two closest resembles what you're trying to track, and then you choose from that option. Scale obviously is going to look to see what gets bigger or smaller, while rotation is going to look for elements on the screen that are moving away from or closer to the camera, depending on how they seem to be rotating on the footage. Now, I am going to do the same thing for this guy here. By dragging from this area here, I'll position it to start. Then I'll resize. By using the handles, I'll resize the tracking area, and I'm going to focus on that dark area of the headlight. And then I'm going to increase this one on the width and decrease it on the height to just give that much margin of error. So with that done, all I need to do now is analyze my footage. So let me zoom out again to fit to 100%. And to analyze my footage, what I want to do is I want to do one of two things. Either I can go step by step by using my analyze one frame forward or backward here. If your footage moves a lot, if there's a lot of motion blur, my advice is that you use these. Go one step at a time, or use the page up, page down keys on your keyboard to move one frame at a time. Page down moves downstream, page up moves upstream. You can track both ways. You can track upstream or downstream. It's up to you. So you would use either this little tools here, but if your footage is not too fuzzy, if you don't get a lot of blurriness because the items in the footage are not moving too fast, like in this case, then you can just go ahead and let the computer do its thing. And that means click on the play button here to analyze forward. Not your space bar, but this button here. And when you click on that, you'll notice that the footage is being tracked. Those two headlights are being tracked. And once it's done, once it completes, you'll notice that there's kind of a an iffy positioning change towards the end. And that is because you notice that the size of the boxes is quite different than the actual size of the headlights at this point in the video footage. And that change starts happening around here. So you can always go back upstream on your composition and continue resize as necessary to keep on tracking. Change your trackers ever so slightly. Make sure that you don't click on one of those little frames that has been created for you, but that you actually click on the tracker. And so you can start modifying the tracking area. Be careful, like I said a second ago, not to move those frames. These are actual keyframes that are being created for you. So zoom in so you get a better view of what you're trying to track. You can reposition again. And what's going to happen is anything from that point on will have to be re-updated for tracking purposes. Anything before this remains the same. As you see, nothing's changed on the previous keyframes, but anything past that point will change because of the change that I made in that specific keyframe. And so if I play back now, the rest of my tracking, it's on point. It actually tracks properly. And if I scrub the video, you'll notice that it remains properly done. Now let's take a look at this really quick. Let's do it again from the beginning. I'm just going to recreate that tracking so you can see that basically the trackers are now following appropriate. Now you don't have to do this last one. I just wanted to show you, but you'll notice how now it changed in this case. So basically, depending on what changes you make, the tracker will change accordingly. Okay. So let me go back to about 18 seconds and move this guy over to the right hand side over here and finish tracking. And maybe move this guy a little bit to the left. This is not going to make much of a difference in terms of the tracking, because with the effect that I'm about to apply, basically is going to nullify the visibility of those track points. What these points have done is if I go to my composition and I press the U key on the keyboard, you'll notice that I have created keyframes. Every one of those frames is a keyframe based on the trackers that have been applied to that layer, track point 1 and track point 2. They are tracking the feature center, which is that rectangle in the center. They're tracking the confidence, which is that outer box, the space that you have where this thing can be fuzzy or not fuzzy. And the attach point is where they are actually the actual point that they're tracking within the footage. So with that said, what I want to do is I want to use that information to apply what I want to apply to the footage. So let me go back to the composition window, and I want to go back to the beginning of my composition. I want to create a solid. I'll make it a black solid, and then I'll make it the size of the comp. Click OK, and onto that solid I will be applying a lens blur, lens flare. So I'll go look for lens flare, and let's see, there it is. So I'll apply a lens flare to that. I will change it from its default type, which is 50 to 300 mil, to 105 mil prime. Gives you a brighter lens. And what I want to do is I want to attach the center of that lens flare to the position of my first tracker point. To do so, I will use the Alt key or the Command key on the Mac to click on the lens flare center, and that would open up my dialog box for code. And then I'll use the pick whip to pick that feature, that tracking point center feature point. Now when I scrub the video, my lens flare should match the position of that side of the car, of that front light in the car. To do so, I want to change the black solids mode from normal to add so that I can see it. And as I scrub, you'll notice that that light is right position on that front light of the car, the headlight of the car. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to duplicate that lens flare filter that I have applied to the black solid, I'll go to the window up here, to the effects controls, and then I'm going to duplicate that lens flare by pressing Command D or Control D on the PC. And then you'll notice that basically it's one lens flare over the other. The second lens flare needs to follow the second tracker. And so to do so, let me expand my composition window a little bit. I am going to press the Alt key on my keyboard, and then I'm going to click on the stopwatch to turn off the code. And then I'm going to click it again while still pressing the Alt key to call the code again, so that it basically all I did was wipe that code from that second lens flare. And now I can use the pick whip to pick the second tracking point. There it is. You'll notice that the code changes, and now both lens flares are tracking the headlights of the car. Now that's a little bit bright, so I want to bring those down slightly. So to do so, I'm going to add a curves filter to the black solid. Let me actually go ahead and collapse all this so that I can see what I'm doing. And I am going to apply a curves filter to the stack of lens flare on top of the lens flare filter. I mean, on top of the other two lens flare filters, and then I'm going to bring that down. Let me actually bring this down all the way here so I can narrow it, and then I'm going to create a slight curve to create softness around the headlights. And so that gives me a pretty decent set of flares, as if I was looking at the car from the front. Okay. And with that done, let me go ahead and go back to my footage. I'm going to use curves on that footage. I'm going to use the same filter, but this time I'm going to use that curves to make that footage from day into nighttime. So let me go ahead and apply that filter to the Audi. And first things first, I'm going to bring down the overall light. Then I'm going to start playing with the different channels. So first I'm going to bring down the red, maybe the green, and I'm going to make that slightly blue. Now that might be a bit too dark, so I might want to bring out the overall RGB. And you basically start playing around until you get the color for the footage that you're looking for, what you're going for within your color window for that footage. In my case, I know that night shots tend to look bluish, so that's why I'm going for to emphasize the blue over any other color. And with that done, let me go ahead and expand this, fit this to 100%, and do a quick preview to see what this looks like. I think those highlights in the car paint are still pretty bright, so I need to go ahead and fix that a little bit. But in terms of tracking, the tracking is doing its job. Now, if you get really weird things, little things here and there, you can always go back and retrack the footage. As you saw, it's a fairly fast process, and you get really good results out of quick work. And then to work on the highlights and all that other stuff, that's just a matter of what you're trying to do with your footage, whether you want to make things flatter or you want to increase and create full night shots, which is what most productions do, something like this, where you actually see everything. In reality, at nighttime, I wouldn't be seeing any of those trees. Or if you really want to sell the shot, then you start thinking, okay, what do I need to include it within this shot to actually make it look like a night shot? Maybe I don't want to see anything on the top up here, so maybe I want to create a gradient that goes from black or from deep blue to transparent. And that way I hide that, place that over the footage, and then leave the tracking on top of everything else, so that my gradient doesn't affect the actual tracking and the actual head spotlight, the lens flares that I created to create the spotlight, the front lights of the car. You also might want to think of adding some kind of spotlights at the bottom on the floor so that it is projecting. So you move those in 3D space, and they will actually work out really well. So this is how you activate and how you track 2D footage in After Effects.